Hello, everyone. We are starting a series of lessons dedicated to building a form. We'll be building it gradually, and to start, we'll use React's native tools to understand the basics. Let's take our page for a new idea and insert our form's code here. First, let's see how it works in the browser, and then we'll go over it. Here we have a form where we can input some values. The first three values are just inputs, and the second one is a text area. And when we submit the form, the data we entered is simply logged to the console. So, if we change something here and submit, the new values will be sent. Let's now break down how this works. First, we use a React hub called useState here. useState turns into an array of two elements, state, which will contain what we initially passed here. This is the default state value, and setState is a function into which you can pass an object of this format, fully replacing the value in the state. To better understand this structure, I could write it like this. No one does it this way now, but to understand, just in case, it works like this. For example, state would be useState result 0, setState would be useState result 1. But it's much easier to simply declare this array with two variables. All right. If needed, you can specify a particular type for useState to enforce the value type, but we don't need that here, as we're perfectly fine with the default it chooses. It sees there are 4 strings here and applies them as such. But if we wanted, for instance, the name to be nullable, we could essentially pass something like this, name string or null, and enumerate all the other values. That's just a note for the future. We'll delve into this later. For now, the default types suffice. Here we see them. Here's our object. All right, moving on. Well, everything is wrapped in a segment. Nothing new here. Now let's look at the form. Form is just an HTML form element. You can pass props. onSubmit to React. onSubmit takes a function. This function receives an argument with the form submission event. And when a native onSubmit occurs in HTML, the form tries to send a post request to the current page's URL, which we don't want. So we ask JavaScript to prevent the default behavior. In the future, we will prevent the default behavior and send a request to the server with our form data. For now, we simply log the message, submitted, and our state, which will contain all the form data, to the console. Here's what will happen on the onSubmit event. And when is the onSubmit event triggered? For example, when we are in an input and press enter, that's the default behavior, or when we click a button with TypeSubmit. If we see such a button, when we click it, it finds the nearest form and calls the onSubmit method on it. That's why and when onSubmit occurs. Now, concerning the inputs themselves, all 4 are almost identical. Let's examine the first one. Here, we see the label component, and it has an HTML4 tag. HTML4 refers to a certain name. Name, let's say, maybe it's easier with a nickname because here and there its name and name is not very clear. For example, with a nickname, HTML4 nickname, it has the nickname of this input. And therefore, when we click on this label, the cursor will be set to this input, demonstrating I clicked on the nickname and the cursor went here. Clicked on description, cursor went here. This is native HTML behavior. It's not from JavaScript. BR is just a line break. And here we have an input. Let's break it down. So, it has a name. And actually, in the scope, within our code, it's completely unimportant. This will be needed in the future. So for now, it doesn't really affect anything. This is only needed for the label to handle clicks. It has type text. What types of input exist in general? There are many. There can be checkbox, date, file, and many other types. But we just need text. And we have an onChange event. The onChange event is triggered when we enter some text directly into the input. And here we also have a function that takes an event as an argument. The event has a target. Target is a reference to the HTML element of the input itself, and the HTML element of the input has a value property, and the value stores exactly the data that was entered in our input. So this is the value that appeared in the input after its change, and then we need to save it in the state. To do this, we call our setState function, which we declared here. We pass an object to it. The object is the following. We copy everything from the state object, and at the same time, we overwrite the nickname with the new value. And because we change the state, the value is also passed from the state, specifically this nickname. So this is how it works in React. We set the state. Initially, all our inputs were empty. We started typing something. The onChange event triggered. In this event, in its method, we changed setState, and therefore, the value displayed in value changed. So, we had an empty state. An event came, setState, new name, and that's why the new name is displayed here. If anything, nothing stops us from outputting it like this. For example, the same state.name, and we'll always have the current value here. So, we type something, and it appears there. That's how React works in this format. If you want to change something in your component, you change some state. Then the React component reacts to its changes. That's the most important thing to understand about React logic. You just need to change the state, and the appearance of your components depends on the state. So that's how you work. Good. So let's look at the other inputs. We have name, nick, and description. They're exactly the same. The equality lies in changing different state values depending on what we're working with here. And the text is very similar. We just have not an input component here, but a text area. Here, everything else is exactly the same. And here's this button. Yes, we see a bunch of repetitive code, but in the following lessons, we'll sort it all out and see how to do it more conveniently and which tools are best suited for this. Thank you. Let's move on.